I don't want no oil spoiling my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes!
Good morning, Toledo, and good afternoon, Columbus, and hello to those of you listening on the internet, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Joe DeMare, and I am here with my incredible co-host,
Rebecca Wood.
Yes, and together, Rebecca and I are going to be bringing you an hour of unforgettable radio called For a Green Future. For a Green Future is a show where we talk about ecology and the environment, and we talk about it in the ways that it affects you, your wealth, your health, your happiness, the wealth and health and happiness of your friends and your family and your garden and your pets and the birds and the bees and pretty much everybody and everything, because that's where we all are together on this big old planet called Earth. And the wealth part, actually, for our listeners in the Toledo Edison area, I have a very direct wealth thing for you. There's some free buddy you might be able to get to. We're going to talk about that in our news segment. And just to preview the whole show, we're going to just chat for the next 15 minutes or so. And please feel free to call in at 877-909-1007. And if you don't get through, just keep trying, because we've had people say they tried to call, and usually it's like the fourth time they'll actually get the phone to ring. So persistence is important. That's 877-909-1007. And then after we're done chatting, in about 15 minutes, we're going to have an interview with a fellow from the Rocky Mountain Institute. And his name is Uday Varadarajan. So it took me a while practicing, but I did finally get that name right. And he's going to be talking about, they did a study on the Prairie State coal plant and figured out that lots of people, lots of municipalities can actually make money by dumping that plant as opposed to continuing to pay for the...
Remember who that reminds me of is the artist Varjan Bogosian. I wonder if they're the same ethnicity.
Could be.
Or maybe not. Maybe it's convergent evolution of sounding of names.
It is a great name, Varadarajan.
You know, like O'Hara being Irish and Japanese. O'Hara.
Okay, yeah. Then after we have our interview, we're going to have to listen to our advertisers and patrons. And then Rebecca will be talking to us about...
Japanese beetles.
Japanese beetles, yes.
They're beautiful but deadly.
Oh, okay. Then on to ecological news, and as I say, there's one of our eco news segments has a little bit about where you can get some money. So that's it. That's what our show's going to be. So I got a lot to talk about in this first 15 minutes here. It's kind of packed. One thing that I wanted to mention is just that something I noticed during the week. I was out walking, on the Slippery Elm Trail out there in Bowling Green, and I went out to where the trail goes in Portage, and alongside the trail there's tons of this flower called bee balm, which if you're familiar with bee balm, it's a very showy kind of flower, and it's named bee balm because bees love it.
Well, it's kind of like purplish red, right? Purplish pink.
Like, there's a lot of bluish,
right,
with some reddish.
Fall.
It's got, the thing is,
Pom-pom.
it's got a ball and then it's got the little tubes that stick out from the ball.
Okay.
Yeah, so,
I think
yeah,
I've seen some before.
it's a pretty flower. But it's supposed to be covered in bees. That's why they call
yeah.
it bee balm.
Okay.
And I noticed
I
that.
thought it was good. It's actually useful for insect bites too.
Oh, is it? Okay. And so I was walking along, and unfortunately, there were lots of flowers, but no bees. And I the reason is
Piffle.
that trail, on either side of that trail, are farm fields with things like corn and squash and stuff that are getting sprayed by tons and tons of pesticides. And so that's how you get lots of flowers with no bees. So it was just kind of sad, and I just wanted to mention it. And that actually, the idea that the pesticides are in the environment and hurting people kind of brings me to the next thing I wanted to talk about.
I would think after a while you would not have any flowers if they need to be pollinated by pollinators also.
Yeah, eventually
Yeah.
the flowering plants die off if there's no pollinators. Yeah, that's what happens. In fact, there's some specialized flowers in Hawaii that had a specialized insect that pollinated only them. That insect went extinct. We actually don't even know what it was, but they know the pollinator's gone. And so now the only way that plant reproduces is when human beings go in there with Q-tips and physically pollinate it themselves. So, which is, not practical to do that for all flowering plants.
That would not be enough for us to survive and eat off of.
Nope, definitely not. But just one thing that I wanted to mention for sure today, and I just learned that this morning. There's a woman named Jan Larson down there in Bowling Green, and she started something called the BG Independent News, which is an internet-based news resource. And she started it after she got fired from the local paper. She was the editor-in-chief of the Sentinel Tribune, and she was fired for doing a editorial saying that we should have gun control, which went exactly opposite the philosophy of the owner of the paper. So she got fired, and then she went and just started this little independent thing with a couple friends, and it's a really nice resource. They do a very good job of covering mundane things like
Speaking of which, we had a little experience on the way here.
oh yeah, okay, I'll mention that in a bit, but what I learned this morning about Jan is, unfortunately, she just got diagnosed with cancer, and it's the second time she's had cancer. And so
we got a friend who got diagnosed this week too.
yeah, and we just want to.
She also got fired the night before.
Oh, really?
So that's great.
Terrible.
Yeah.
Wow. So our sympathies out to Jan. Hope you recover and get, beat cancer again for the second time. And just like I say, it's just a reminder, and your friend too, that our environment has become so polluted that now 1 out of 2 people can expect to get cancer in their lifetime, which is just insane. But it's also something that we environmentalists have been warning about since the 70s. We've been saying, if we keep putting these chemicals in the air and in the ground and in the water, we will get cancer at unbelievable rates. And some of it we've stopped. We've had some successes, like we got rid of DDT. We've banned a lot of really harmful stuff, but we have to get to the point where we don't put the harmful stuff in first and then figure out, oh, that's dangerous, now we need to ban it. We need to get to the point where we have what's called the precautionary principle, whereas you don't just throw it out there and see what it does, where you do some studies and figure out whether or not to do it in the first place. And so, our sympathies out to Jan and to your friend.
It should not be a certain amount of people have to die, and it's a very large amount before we do anything about this threat to life.
Exactly. But on an upbeat note, I'm a little rushed on the show today because I have I've been working all week to get ready for the Wood County Fair, which is going to go August 1st through 8th. And we have a booth there. The Wood County Green Party has a booth there. And got a whole bunch of volunteers that are going to come down and be at the booth at the fair. And we're going to sell vegan cookies, which are, that's our sort of our specialty, and some nice t-shirts. But just, I wanted to mention, because fairs in general are cool. Fairs in general are really something that I love. I don't love the way animals are treated at the fair. They're stuck in those little stalls and just sort of have to sit there while people stare at them and make faces at them and stuff like that. But the idea that just people are coming together from the whole county and from the whole region to have fun and to some degree get your mind expanded, because that's historically people who go to fairs to see like the new and the latest thing. And I remember the World's Fairs back in the 20th century there, when people were introduced to incredible things like refrigeration, home refrigeration, and stuff that does make your life better. And so it's just fun. And I think in a green future, there will still definitely be fairs, and they'll just be,
The whole idea of, I think, incubators for preemies was originally pioneered at a World's Fair. It was like an exhibit, like we sort of displayed the preemies and the women who cared for them like they were freaks. But it did sort of popularize the idea that if a baby is born early, you can do something to help it.
You can save it. Oh.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that happened, because my first son spent his first 2.5 months in an intensive care nursery. So I'm glad that caught on. And
yes.
And so, and you can go and there'll be vendors there selling things like solar and geothermal heating systems. So
not to mention that there's like a history of, in the 1800s, like non-white people who lived as hunter-gatherers, like having a little village of them displayed like zoo animals. So that's special.
True. I guess that was the closest thing they could come to multiculturalism.
There we go. Yeah. So it's like a microcosm. It's like the best and the worst of
yeah. Well, I mean, at least they got to see, hey,
society.
Look, those are actual human. They're actually humans. I mean, when you read about exotic tribes, it's hard to think of those in terms of being actual just people. So I guess it was a good thing that people went and saw them, and but not so good that they were just displayed like zoo animals. Yeah, so it's
really cool.
It's small steps, but at least we're not to the point. At least we've got over that point. We're not to the point where we do that anymore.
Thank heavens.
So,
yes.
So I'm always looking for improvement. All right. And speaking of improvement, our interview with Uday Varadarajan is talking about how municipalities that have signed on to this disastrous deal with the Prairie State coal plant, how they could improve their bottom line and shut down the coal plant at the same time. They did this really nice article, and that's why I wanted to talk to him. So, Josh, let's go to the interview. Uday Varadarajan, welcome to For a Green Future. Could you please share with our audience what your position is and who you're with?
Well, first of all, thanks so much, Joe, for inviting me. I'm a principal at RMI, a think tank based out of Boulder, Colorado, and also a fellow at Stanford's Sustainable Finance Initiative.
Aha. Well, as I say, welcome to For a Green Future. And I read a little bit about your bio. You actually got your start in physics, didn't you?
I did.
Yeah, so it must be kind of interesting. You've sort of made the leap from physics to politics there. I mean, you worked at the White House for a while. Which is more complicated in your opinion?
Oh, without a doubt, the politics and the policy. Physics is about trying to find the simplest problems in the world to solve, even though it uses complex math. And politics is about the opposite.
Okay. Well, and could you just tell us a little bit about RMI, about the Rocky Mountain Institute, for our listeners that aren't familiar?
Sure. RMI is about a 40-year-old think tank focused on energy and policy issues. We really focus on attempting to find market-based solutions that can enable and unlock affordable clean energy. We're one of the first think tanks really to focus on clean energy, starting with efficiency. That was really the calling card of our founder, Amory Lovins, who was an early evangelist for efficiency and distributed energy solutions as an alternative to reliance on oil and gas and petrostates and the like.
Okay. Well, and towards that end, you folks publish a lot of really excellent research,
And an article that caught my eye a while ago, and I'm sorry we're having to search our memories here a little bit. It was back in 2021. You produced an article called Transition Opportunities for Prairie State Energy Campus. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So at the time, there were that we started this work, which was in 2020 and 2021 in Illinois, around starting to find ways to incentivize more rapid decarbonization of electricity generation, in particular across the state. Is a state that it's got a broad range of perspectives when it comes to climate change, but I think all in all, the state has been a leader in trying to move more rapidly towards decarbonizing all of the sectors of its economy. And one of the biggest challenges that Illinois faces in trying to really move to a cleaner future is to really find alternatives to continuing to get power from its old coal generating stations, but there's one exception to that, which is Illinois is also a state which has built one of the newest coal plants in the United States. And the Prairie State campus is a fairly new plant that was built in Illinois, an otherwise progressive state that really wants to address climate, and is currently delivering power to over 270 different municipal and cooperative utilities across the country. It's a pretty significant source of power, a very new coal plant, and a big challenge for those in Illinois who want to move rapidly towards addressing clean energy. And so we wrote the paper to try to explore opportunities and options for transitioning this plant. It's new. And unfortunately, what we found as we were starting to look at the plant and understand its economics, understand some of the challenges that the local communities might face in replacing it, what we found is that even though it was a relatively new plant, it's a pretty expensive plant for a lot of those communities. People thought that it was going to be a pretty good deal when they built it a little over 10 years ago when it started operating. And what they found, and what we found, was that it was surprisingly a much worse deal for the customers in those 270 utilities than we might have actually expected. And that indeed there is an opportunity, an interesting one, for those customers to move towards clean energy, to start to replace some of the power that's more expensive that they're getting from this plant and the mine attached to it with cleaner energy. But it isn't completely easy, and the story is a little bit complicated. And I'm happy to talk a little bit more about why it isn't quite that easy to shift away from that power. But that was what we were exploring. It's one of those challenges and what could be done to make that economic opportunity, which is really to shift away from this coal plant, even a new coal plant, which is not really cost effective, but to make that work for customers and some of the communities involved in the near term.
Right. Well, one of the reasons we're interested in this in For a Green Future here is that, I actually live in a municipality called Bowling Green, Ohio, and Bowling Green has, we were one of the first municipalities to jump in on this contract with Prairie State. In fact, Bowling Green signed a 50-year contract and is buying power from Prairie State at quite high prices, at 10 cents a kilowatt hour approximately. So so I know what you're talking about, because we are definitely one of those communities which is suffering from higher electricity rates. Yes, so could you go into, you said you could go into a little more detail about the complexities of the situation there.
Happy to do that. So Prairie State, because it was built fairly recently, unlike a fair chunk of coal plants in the country, which often were built many decades ago, this plant is yet to be really paid off from a financing point of view. all of the co-ops and municipal utilities that chose to become either part owners or enter into long-term contracts with this asset are bound to some degree contractually by the agreement they made that allowed the plant to be built. And that financing arrangement creates a bit of a ball and chain. Either if an entity, for example, a municipal joint power authority that built it, if it is one of the part owners, then it has significant debt that is tied to the plant. It issued a lot of debt for it, and it has had to often issue additional debt in the intervening time if there were needs, capital needs that were, in order to, for instance, keep the plant running or maintain the plant. Those created additional capital needs that might have been needed to have been covered by those joint powers authorities. Or if, like Bowling Green, they entered into a long-term contract with the entity, then they're also stuck paying for the power on a forward-looking basis. And so these contractual agreements and financing arrangements, the debt that was used, even if you were to stop operating it, just didn't burn coal anymore, those debts are still ones that need to be paid. Those contracts are still outstanding and would need to be renegotiated or otherwise modified. And this creates a big challenge, a headache, that makes it challenging for either party, the folks who built and owned, who the joint powers authorities who currently own the asset, or the counterparties, the utilities that are buying power from them, to really step away. They all made agreements that keep them bound to this plant for a long period of time, at least without any further help to help them unwind that. And the cost of that debt and the implications on power prices are pretty significant. It's not just about the cost of the fuel that's burned that's getting more and more expensive. It's also the cost of that debt and how it seeps in to the prices paid by customers. If you try to get out from under that debt without help, then that can also have negative repercussions. Just like if you don't pay your credit card or something like that, you're going to have trouble getting access to finance at a low cost. Your credit rating is going to go down. It's going to be hard for you to get another credit card or do anything like it. And something similar is true for municipal utilities that try to step away from agreements that they've made. So it's really difficult for both the entities that own it and for the entities that are buying power from it to really step away. And it's one of the difficulties with stepping away from this plant. The second one is there are, of course, a lot of workers who work in the mine and in the plant who've devoted their lives to building and maintaining and operating these assets. And indeed, they did so often with the expectation that they'd have a job for a good chunk of the rest of their lives working on it. And many of those, as we think about what we do when it comes to retiring this asset, we should also think about, and I think it's only fair to consider what might happen to them and what their future might be as well. So
right,
these are the types of issues. Yeah.
Right, but the title of your article and the thrust of your article, opportunities with Prairie State, if I'm not wrong, it wasn't the thrust that basically that the price of solar and wind power have become so low that municipalities, many of them, could actually afford to do what you're describing. They could stop taking the power from there, pay the penalties, pay the the minimum that they're required to pay by their obligations, but because they're buying the cheaper wind and solar power, still essentially come out ahead.
Yeah, and that gets to some of the solutions. It is true that in some cases, indeed, buying power from clean energy, as we're over the coming few years, what we believe to be the case is that because of falling clean energy prices, that we're going to very soon be in a situation where many municipalities around the country, many of them can already start displacing some of the energy that they would have otherwise used from Prairie State with clean energy and still end up making and even if they were continue to be obligated to pay for the existing asset, they may come out ahead. However, it depends on the particulars, details of individual contracts and agreements that are in place. And this is a place where some coordinated discussion is going to be important. On a forward-looking basis, some negotiation can be helpful. It may or may not be the case, for example, for any individual utility, it is important to look at the question of what precisely the obligations or penalties they have under the terms of their contract. But if a group of municipal utilities, for instance, for example, to go to the existing owners of the asset and say, hey, you guys should operate this asset less so that we can buy other cleaner power. In principle, with such an agreement, it should be possible for all parties to still come out ahead. There may be less coal purchase, there may be less coal burn, the asset may be dispatched less because it is less needed, and there certainly could be savings, even if there are in some cases penalties to be had, just because the cost of operating the plant is often less than the price of replacement generation in some areas. And what we're finding is that indeed it does seem to be the case that for many of the jurisdictions that buy power from Prairie State, they can indeed at least find clean energy that can reduce their reliance on Prairie State while potentially even allowing them to pay potentially some penalties. But that depends on the details.
Right, but I think it's important from an environmental standpoint to shut Prairie State down, because it puts hundreds of millions of tons of carbon in the air every day, and in fact, at about every 2 weeks, it puts about 1 billion tons of CO2 into the air. So I'm sitting here, basically both of us had to turn off our fans to do this interview so that they weren't on the recording. And people are sweltering all over the planet. I think this is probably a good time to start actually doing what you guys have found is economically feasible for a lot of municipalities.
It definitely is the right time to start making the plans to move beyond Prairie State. It is the opportunities there. Again, I think a managed transition can address some of the challenges that we've talked about. We talk about the workers there. We talk about the owners of the plant. There are options and opportunities to use the existing infrastructure at Prairie State, for example, to in different ways that might be more conducive to a more rapid transition. You don't always. It isn't every day that, for example, if you shut down a plant like Prairie State, what you're going to, the infrastructure that's built to allow Prairie State to operate includes a whole lot of water rights. It includes rights. Often it includes the ability to interconnect into a grid at the gigawatt scale. It includes very frequently rail or a highway or road infrastructure around it as well. All of this infrastructure is valuable even in the absence of the operation of the existing asset, and could be repurposed in many ways for alternative job opportunities, for cleaner resources, to integrate cleaner resources, or to create, for example, demand-side resources or manufacturing that can be consistent with a clean energy future. And so there is a real opportunity for municipal owners and off-takers to have a conversation about how the Prairie State campus could be turned from an existing and not necessarily cost-effective source of greenhouse gas emissions and a challenge for our climate goals to something that it's quite the opposite.
All right.
And this is the opportunity that I think it takes some leadership, but it's the right time to start thinking and organizing around finding a way to make that happen.
Okay. Well, thanks so much, Uday.
And thank you, folks, for listening. That was our interview with Uday
Varadarajan from the Rocky Mountain Institute. And I hope that the people at the municipal utilities in Bowling Green were listening to that, because they're probably the poster child for a municipal utility that should get out of its deal with Prairie State in terms of like paying the most and having the longest term commitment and losing the most money and generating the most carbon at the same time. And as they discovered in that study, you can save money and you can stop buying the coal power, and you know, it's better for everybody. So another thing that's good for everybody are our sponsors and patrons.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, For Green Future is brought to you by the Wood County Park District. The Wood County Park District is a natural resources conservation agency. They protect natural spaces, maintain quality green spaces, provide engaging programming, and they teach people to love and respect nature. They restore wildlife habitats, and they lead people on outdoor adventures. Wood County Parks protects natural spaces in Wood County for all to enjoy, from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset every single day of the year. And there's ways to find out what they're doing over there. They're not secret about it at all. You just go to their website at wcparks.org. Another is to go to their, just download their app. You can go to any app store and download it at WC Parks. And you can call them at 419-353-1897. And of course, you can also join them on social media, subscribe to their channel on Facebook and Instagram and all sorts of other social media. That's the Wood County Park District. And I just want to say that August coming up, they have a packed schedule. In fact, they got so many things going. I don't have time to list them all, but definitely get over to their website and check out what's coming up with the Wood County Park District. And For a Green Future is also brought to you by our wonderful, wonderful patrons. And these are people who have gone to patreon.com, that's Patreon. They searched for a Green Future. Up popped our Patreon page, and they scrolled through looking at the pretty pictures, and they picked one that met their budget. And so now every month a little bit comes out of their account, comes over to us, and that's how we could afford to keep the show on the air. And I particularly want to recommend, there's two levels there. There's the cat lovers level and there's the dog lovers level, and they're both the same level. But you know, if you love one or the other, and you know want to promote your preferred pet, I'd suggest you subscribe at that level. And so far the dog level is winning. So there's more dog lovers than cat lovers, unless cat lovers want to prove that wrong and sign up. You
gotta step up, cat lovers.
Yeah. And I also particularly wanted to thank Jack, who he is not a Patreon patron, but he does make contributions, and he just made a very generous contribution this past week. And so he counts as a patron, even though he's not a Patreon patron. So thank you very much, Jack, for your support. For a Green Future is also brought to you this week by Your Garden. Yes, in your backyard or in your planter, on your porch, wherever you garden, there's literally no way to get fresher food than to just pluck it off the plant and eat it. So once upon a time, 41% of people's vegetables and fresh produce came from backyard gardens. Not that long ago, as recently as the 70s, in the 1970s. But we've all gotten trained to go to the store to get fresh food. Well, go to your backyard and get even fresher food from your garden. Okay, so that's our advertisers and patrons, and now it's time for Rebecca. What have you got for us this week, Rebecca?
By a special request from listeners, we have Japanese beetles.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, Japanese beetles. Their scientific name is Popelia japonica. They are a type of scarab beetle, look a little bit like a staghorn. They're really attractive colors of green and bronze. Like the thorax and the head are like this beautiful iridescent green, and you get this shiny bronze elytra. Elytra or elytra? Probably elytra. Anyway, an elytra is a hardened forewing that is like the outer wing, and then it protects the inner wing, and they have to first raise the hard wing, and then the real wings actually fly, that come out, that are under that. So yeah, the problem is they're really not attractive enough to make up for eating everything green. Just about. They eat over 300 species of plants in a very immoderate way. There's no take a few nibbles and leave the rest of it. They eat some of them, and I've heard this from people I know. I mentioned I was going to cover Japanese beetles, and people are like, oh yeah, they like roses. So yeah, they like roses, grapes, hops, canna, crepe myrtles, virgin linden, some of your more popular crops in this country. It has a habit of skeletonizing leaves by just eating everything but the leaf veins, just kind of leaving them sitting there like, oh, interesting leaf veins. Plant's dead. And the larvae eat the roots of grasses. They're believed to have entered the United States on nursery plants before 1912. They've been in airports in America since the 1940s, in Canada since 1939. They found them in the Azores in the Portuguese islands on the Atlantic in the 1970s. I didn't know that. I thought they were Spanish. On the European mainland since 2014. And there's a sudden upsurge in the population. It went from finding less than 10 or something in Washington State and then suddenly in 2021 there were 1,000. There were over 1,000. So worrisome,
Mm-hmm.
They're finding them in parts of Ohio too. They seem to be on the rise, and you got to think that maybe the increased heat has something to do with that. Their life cycle takes about a year, except for that's under normal conditions. If it's very, very cold or has very high altitude, then it will maybe take them 2 years to go through their life cycle. They spend most of that as a grub. As a larva. They go from egg to larva to C-shaped grub to pupa to imago. An imago is the final adult form of an insect. In psychology, it's also an idealized image that you have subconsciously of a person. If your idealized subconscious image of someone is as an insect, you need a psychologist. Just saying.
Right.
So yeah,
So
ways you can try to.
That's IMAGO?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So they tried these traps that have specially been built to attract them, consisting of like a plastic bag of flower smell and some little sort of funnel thingies that go into it. Those attract many more than they kill, so they just attract a lot of Japanese beetles to your plant and kill almost none of them. They are subject to milky spore disease, actually some kind of a bacteria that kills their larvae. It's available as a powder, I guess, from the USDA. Seems a little risky, but people are getting desperate. Squash repels them. Interesting. Sprayed kaolin? Is that how you say it? Kaolin is a type of clay. Kaolin.
Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe. If you just have a few, you can probably either just shake them off, pick them off, or spray soap and water on them. Soap and water sometimes works. Or they have floating row covers, but those necessitate hand pollination of whatever you're covering. So that's a problem. So yeah, the situation's a little bit grim. But if you get them where they're when it's just a small infestation, maybe the soap and water thing will work.
All right. So
be alert,
right,
gardeners.
And I went to a little presentation on using as few pesticides as possible that was sponsored by the Wood County Park District.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the points that the gal made who was given the presentation, the woman. I'm a man of the 20th century. I just say that gal word without thinking about it. The woman who was making the presentation pointed out the importance of...
You should say person now, Joe. Gender is bad.
Oh, I don't even get to say woman anymore?
I think not. Well, it's probably okay if she identifies as a woman.
All right, one step at a time.
We're assuming.
Right. I'm on the woman, all right?
Right.
Okay.
You're making progress.
So anyway...
you don't know. She could be non-binary.
I didn't ask her.
Right.
Okay. I probably should have, or maybe, I don't know. That's probably bad too. Anyway, she pointed out that the importance of responding to these things very quickly. So like you're looking at your garden every day, and the first time you see Japanese beetles, you immediately react to them, and you don't like wait a week or 2 weeks and say,
Right.
are they going to is there going to be more?
Yes, there are going to be
'Cause,
more.
yeah, the answer is yes, there will be
Spoiler
more.
alert, there will be a lot more.
But if you react immediately, you might be able to head off the whole infestation. So-
That's one of the things it says is that the presence of beetles on plants attracts more beetles because
mhm.
it's monkey see, beetle do. It seems like.
Yeah, they probably give off pheromones and stuff and say, hey, party's
Yeah.
over here.
Yeah.
All right. Well, great. Well, thanks, Rebecca, for that report on Japanese
welcome.
beetles. And then now on to ecological news. And for our first story, we're not going too far. We're just going to Cleveland. And this is kind of an interesting story. It's sort of a sign of the times story here. In Cleveland, they have something called Tower City. I don't know if you're familiar with
They
that.
do, yes, I had a seagull buddy there that used to take french fries out of my hands on the balcony outside.
Oh, cool. And so it's just like a mall with shops and stuff, basically?
Yeah, and a food court and some little balconies that you can commune with seagulls in, or at least they were in the 90s. Maybe that's not that. And the train station is in the basement, the transit train station.
Right. And so, yeah, in
There's a
that
hotel attached. All
in
kinds
that
of stuff.
in that area where they've got the big atrium and stuff,
Right.
they have something called Skylight Park, and
Used to be a fountain that was synchronized to music or something.
Right.
And now there's this atrocity.
there was a fountain, right?
Yes.
But now it turns out this Skylight Park, which was funded in part by the Cuyahoga Valley National Park, which is Ohio's only national park, they opened up these quote-unquote gardens. But I was alerted by one of my Facebook friends, Cassandra Vasu, and it turns out that the gardens are plastic. There's no actual plants in the gardens. And so you go there, and reportedly there's this overwhelming plastic smell, and there's just these plastic plants, and apparently it's
Why?
horrible.
Why?
And then to add the insult to that injury, in each of the little plastic areas with the different kinds of plastic plants, there's a quote from a famous environmentalist.
Arrgh.
And the most ironic one that I saw was, quote, "Just being surrounded by bountiful nature rejuvenates and inspires us," unquote.
Sometimes you don't realize you're living in a work of dystopian fiction because it's not fiction.
Yeah,
You know?
right.
Like, this is like a folk song, this snarky folk song from the 1970s or something.
Right, and so that was a quote by...
Only it's real.
Yeah, it is real. And that was a quote by
Oh,
E.O.
God.
Wilson, who's a very famous ant biologist, and he also took the lessons he learned from studying ants and applied them to humans in a very famous book called On Human Nature. Won the Pulitzer Prize a couple times, just passed away last fall at 92. But it was pointed out that the fact that all these environmentalists that they quoted are now spinning in their graves would probably be a source of unending energy, because
Look for the whole plate tectonics thing to get all riled up after this and from the spinning.
right. And I actually had a little trouble believing this story because it was on Facebook, and just from the pictures you can't tell that they're plastic, because they're very clever plastic, where they have the little fake dead fronds and stuff like that to make you really think it's real. But so I sent a message to Cuyahoga National Park via Facebook. I said, "Dear Park, there's a rumor going around that the quote natural experience unquote at the Skylight quote park unquote, which you helped fund, is made of nothing but plastic plants and astroturf. Is this true? And if so, why did you waste money on this fraud?" Question mark. And they answered, and what they said is, "There were drainage issues with the old fountain. We do have some native plants included in the display. We are trying to introduce the concept of green space to urban audiences who've never heard of
Because
actual
it's
plants.
not actually, green space
Yeah.
does not mean you just slapped a coat of green paint on it.
No, giving
God.
a quiet space to experience. Yes, there are plastic plants, so they admit it. But there's also green plants among them, blending to give healthier air and a respite. But according to
It
my...
would be even healthier if it was all the real plants.
Very true. And according to my source, none of the plants in the display area are real. Those are all 100% plastic, but there's some planters like off to the side and in corridors and stuff, not part of the quote-unquote park, that are alive. But yeah.
Cuyahoga Valley National Park.
Yeah, I thought that was worth reporting on. That's just sort of a,
oh my God.
We are taking steps back. That is something you'd expect happened back in the 1950s, but here it is in Cleveland. All right, on to some other news, some positive news here. California, back last month and in April, hit 100% power from renewables. And so I think that's a great story to talk about.
All right, go Cali.
Just wind and solar and geothermal and bioenergy, which is, but bioenergy was only a tiny percentage of it. So on April 30th, California hit 99.87% supplied by renewable resources, 2/3 of which came from the solar power in California. And California has gone very hard into rooftop solar. They've done a whole bunch. They've got over 1 million roofs
Good for them.
on rooftop solar. And so that's really good. And then later on, that a week later, on May 8th, it hit 103%. So and that was
excellent.
And so yeah, so that's not including large scale hydro, because California, for its definitions, doesn't use large scale hydro as a renewable resource, but it does include small scale hydro, small plants, little areas. So, but once again, disproving the people who say we need to have nuclear power, disproving the people who say that we can't supply all our energy needs with wind and solar. Now, it's true that it was only doing it briefly, but the fact that it was able to do it at all gives the lie to all these people that say we can't do it, it's not possible, and they're just wrong. So that was some good news. Now on to some other news. This is sort of a mixed message here on this one. HB6, that story, the never-ending environmental story
it's the
of
zombie
HB6,
story.
right? Turns out that there has been a settlement, and this is what I referred to at the start of the show. You folks from Toledo Edison actually get a share of the settlement, but you have to ask for it before October. And what it is, you'll get a refund of all the money that you were charged by House Bill 6 to bail out the nuke plant and to bail out the coal plants. Well, no, not to bail out the coal plants, but the charges that were put on your bill as part of House Bill 6, except for the coal plant charges, which continue, you get a refund of those. And
how do you apply for this?
Well, I was searching for it. I haven't been able to find it. I did find a reference to it from a website called topclassactions.com, but that's a website that basically wants to charge you to give you the information on how to get your settlement with. So I'm not recommending people use that website. I'm just saying that's where I got the reference to it. And First Energy is putting up 37.5 million of that 49 million. Energy Harbor's putting up 11.5 million of it. And so that was something I liked, the fact that Energy Harbor, the company that they spun off to own the nuke plants that were given the bailout from the bribes, I'm glad they got dinged for something. But a lot of people are unhappy with this because the class action settlement was only 49 million and the amount of bribes paid was over 60 million. So the class action settlement is actually less than the bribes that were paid. So
they came out ahead, essentially.
I think they should at least pay an equal amount. You should at least set the penalty equal to the crime. The whole idea of restitution. But they did pay it last year. They did pay a $270 million fine. So that was nice that they got dinged for that. They're going to lose money on it because they ended up, the Ohio State Legislature got rid of the nuclear bailout addition after a couple of years because it was because First Energy then told them to do that. same way they told them to put the charges on, First Energy told them to take the charges off, because changes in federal policy meant that they would actually lose money if they took those charges. So, well, anyway, but so I'm going to keep searching for how to access that fund, and I'm going to try to have that information next week. But at least you'll get a little something for getting gypped, and for
Fingers
listening.
crossed. Your lips to God's ears.
Right, and for listening to this show, because I'm not seeing this information anywhere else. That there's a settlement that if you're a First Energy customer, you're entitled to part of it. So, all right, on to our last story, and this is a nice upbeat story. This was a story based on Science Daily, and it was published on the 29th of this year, July 29th of this year. And basically it's saying they found a bioremediation way for PFAS, those forever chemicals that are basically everywhere now.
That'd be good.
Ubiquitous, a nice word. And it's a two-step process. And what they found is that they put the contaminated water or soil or whatever, they expose it to, they've got this plant-based material that they've created, and the plant-based material absorbs the PFAS, and then they add fungus, and the fungus breaks down, the fungus dissolves, digests the plant material, and in the process it neutralizes the PFAS. So it just, fungi are amazing. They can break down almost any toxic poison thing if given the right conditions.
What's her name? Stacy Reed? No, not Stacy. Stacy somebody.
Stacy Jurish?
Stacy Jurish, yeah.
Oh.
She did some kind of a project for the one of the Automatic 419s before that went under. Like illustrating how this fungus eat cigarette butts or something.
Yeah, they could eat almost anything, and dioxins, for example. I read a study where if you put dioxins in a low nitrogen environment, the fungus will digest the dioxins to get at the nitrogen, and it's and so nature has ways to do all these things, and I mean. We reported a few weeks ago about the new process that they found that will break plastic down.
And yet, instead of leaving the leaks in the boat and bailing, maybe we could stop the leak. We could stop making the PFAS.
Right.
We're dumping so much of it in the environment, too.
Yes,
although
absolutely.
bailing also good.
Yeah, no. Well, we have largely abandoned PFAS in the United States.
Good.
We're still importing some from other countries, but this is one where the manufacturers looked at the contamination and the danger of it, and on their own they said, well, we're not going to go through that whole thing we went through with asbestos or all those other nasty chemicals. They got out on their own. So I guess they can be taught, I guess.
There we go, yeah. Theoretically. Well, yeah.
And so that's one reason this is a safe pollutant that people from all political parties, Republicans and Democrats, talk about PFAS contamination, because there's no PFAS lobby saying we need to keep making more of it because we're making money off it.
Cool.
The U.S. got out of the PFAS manufacturing industry, so now we can just deal with the problem without having to worry about the money. One more thing, and those of you who've listened to the show for a long time know that we have accepted texts. You could text questions anytime at 419-973-5841. Unfortunately, we can't answer texts on the show right now. We're working back towards to where we can. But someone sent me a text after the show last week, and they were questioning if I used my solar heating on my house, which I have a 6 kilowatt electric system, to heat my hot water. And the answer is no, because electrical heating of hot water is very inefficient. And so even if you've got a fair bit of solar panels, you're not going to get that far in heating your water with it. But I am working towards switching my whole house over to geothermal heating. And the thing about geothermal heating is that it produces tons and tons of hot water. So in fact, usually what you need to do is add a second hot water tank. And so you'll have, like, instead of 50 gallons of hot water, you'll have like 100 gallons of hot water at your beck and call. And since geothermal heating uses electricity,
That'll get me through 1 or 2 novels in the bathtub, Joe. But come on, that's a good start.
yeah. So when I've switched over to geothermal heating, then my solar panels, which are supplying electricity, will be supplying my hot water as well. So an excellent question. Now, there are systems that use solar electric panels as also thermal electric panels. They pour water over the top of them. Since they're dark, it absorbs the heat from them, and it actually makes them more efficient, and you're generating hot water at the same time. But I don't have one of those. They're a little complicated to set up, and like I say, what I'm working towards is geothermal. All right, that's it. That's our show. Thank you so much for listening. This is Joe DeMare.
And Rebecca Wood.
And we are signing off.
Bye-bye.
I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done.